All right, so we have our second meeting with the Plastic Revolutions today, and we have the General Manager and Vice President, right? Mr. Ed Handy with us. And so unlike the first time when we did the company tour and did mainly questions and answers about the company history and products, this time we are nearing the end of the competition, and we already have a lot of materials that the students have collected. And so here we have a few students, some of whom will present what they have so far, not the final answers, just the projects or drafts. And then we'll also have several randomly selected reports that also contain most of the information students are intending to submit in a week. And we would like to receive some intermediate feedback as to what is good, what is bad. Some ideas perhaps have no hope at all, and maybe some of them look interesting, so that the rest of the teams can also take that information, and while they still have time, make improvements so that the final product is most interesting to the company, right? And we also have here Tim Chitwood, right? So who's also the general manager, and apparently just started here recently, so if we have questions, perhaps also we'll turn to him, and several students. Would you like to maybe start with the presentation, or we need to set up the, we'll do that later. Well, actually, maybe let me get the computer so you can upload your, I'll cut it out later, so I forgot about the computer. Let me start the computer. I'll cut this point so that we have nice and clean. And you want to upload maybe your materials, right? All right, so just put it on the computer here. All right, so let's go just in any random order and take a look at some of the reports here. For example, there is one from Team 132, and so they all had to prepare first a little executive summary and then the details. And so the executive summary should give us the main ideas. So this particular company suggests that you expand your business, particularly with respect to selling your product, to the United States Southwest. So they're talking about New Mexico, Texas, Arizona, and possibly even Mexico as the country. And so the reasons they provide for that suggestion is that first, there is limited competitive presence there, so apparently not many recycling plants there. Now, you also have a unique capability to reuse 100% of your wastewater. So if you ever wanted to open perhaps a facility there, and I know you didn't plan to open new facilities, but if you were, you would have a huge advantage there because they don't have much water. And then obviously the existing rail and highway infrastructure allows to go to that to those locations easily. They have demographics and population growth in a way that will easily allow you to staff your operations if you needed to. And so that economy seems to be, or that region of the country seems to be growing very well. And we'll get into marketing and other things in a minute. Okay. So what's your response to that? Do you think there may be hope in southwestern United States for you, either for buying plastic or to selling plastic too, or maybe even opening another plant there?
Yes, we currently buy a lot of plastic that comes through Laredo. That's actually coming from, it's collected in Mexico, and it comes here, all the way here to be recycled. Sometimes they granulate it and we just wash it. Sometimes they just bale it up and we granulate it and wash it and pelletize it here. So there's already, Texas is already a hub for material coming out of Mexico. Port at Miami is a hub for the islands and some of the South American countries already. So we do import quite a bit of scrap polyethylene, and the reason that it's in high demand is the amount of scrap polyethylene collected and recycled in the United States is in short supply. We struggle to get enough of it to keep our machines running, and the export or importing from South America and the Central America and the islands is getting bigger every year. There's there's different scenarios you run up against, like the peso devaluated right now. Yeah. Well, that helps people selling in dollars coming across the border, and it would help tourists and so forth taking dollars into the country. So there's a mixed bag of tricks that are happening, but it's generally speaking, when plastic is cheap in the United States, there's not as much importing done because it's available here.
Right.
The price starts up in the United States, then the amount of imported from South America, and I'm sure they export to China too.
Right. And
but
at this time, the price is low, I assume.
it started out November high, and it's dropped off about 25% as the months have progressed.
Oh, so
And,
the fluctuations are so big, it's not plus or minus 2%. It's
and
up.
history shows it'll stay down till February, and then start back up. And there's various reasons for it. A lot of the recycled plastic goes into the pipe industry that makes underground pipe, and there's a slowdown in that industry for various reasons. Commodity pricing for soybeans and corn, the big Midwest crops, the prices those down, and people are not putting as much pipe in the fields and putting up new fields. Banks have pulled back on lending for big projects, so people are having trouble getting a big construction project going that uses a lot of plastic pipe. So the pipe market is kind of dented right now, but that normally turns out to be pent-up demand that comes roaring back maybe this spring. A lot of it depend on the direction the president takes in certain things. I'm sure he's going to help one industry and hurt another one. It's not a zero-sum game.
Always.
Everything he plans or anybody else plans, it's somebody benefits and somebody doesn't. Now, as far as setting up a plant in Texas or that area, yeah, that is a possibility. Also, California, and the students.
So you are open to the idea of opening
Yes.
more plants in other regions?
Yes, the student hit a great point that our recycling water technology, which is unique.
Yeah.
There is not a lot of recyclers in California right now for that one reason. They are so tough on the water. Unless you've got a high profit business, you don't want to deal with the cities out there on your water.
Right.
I mean, it's really like a plant in California will have two water mains, one with recycled water coming in and one with the drinking water coming in. And they are very particular because it's a drought prone region. So our technology of recycling water would put us ahead of other people trying to relocate there. For the last 20 years, most recyclable plastic like we use here has been baled and went to China from the West Coast. There's not that much recycling out there. It's a lot of collecting, but not recycling. So that is a good point. I'll say one other thing about the markets it's probably pertinent to almost every proposal you got there, and that's the fact that oil prices are depressed, which depresses recycling. It depresses the prices you can get for recycled product. It makes people use the virgin plastic more. So every marketing expansion idea is muffled right now because of the oil situation. And it's not projected to improve for the next year. When they look at the next year, they're looking at maybe $57 a barrel for oil, which is 46 now, so that they're not seeing much of an improvement going out.
And for you, the higher the price of oil,
The better for us. If oil stayed down permanently, it would almost kill off recycling. Because recycling flourishes when people use recycled products. When the new plastic is so cheap, why use recycle? You know, they go for the new stuff. There are few companies and people that will use recycle because it's the right thing to do for the planet, but they're not the majority.
Well, and a number of reports here, and we'll get to them in a minute, actually identified a number of countries where the laws require recycling or recycled materials must be used for manufacturing.
Yes.
And so even though it may not make economic sense, the way the policies are working actually may they may have no choice.
Yeah.
Right.
Here in the United States, most of the laws that I'm familiar with about recycling say they're written to the standpoint you're not allowed to put that in a landfill, but it doesn't mandate that it has to be used. And
what are the other options then?
yeah, well,
So
what
if
the,
not-
the intention of the law is to force it to be used somewhere. And even if you have to pay somebody to recycle it, they're not gonna let you throw it in the landfill.
Uh-huh.
And that has some effect, but it's like a person down in the recycling division of the state of North Carolina, a state person, said that it's been mandated that you cannot throw aluminum in the landfill for over 20 years, and they still don't recycle but about half of it. So it takes a while for laws. You know, they recently passed a law in this state and county that you can't throw plastic bottles in the landfill. But that don't mean it ain't a bunch going in there. You know,
Right.
This county, for instance, didn't have a household collection until recently. So people were way out in the boonies with a couple of bottles and nobody to give them to, and the law saying you can't put them in the trash. And they were told when they asked the question to go ahead and put them in the trash until we get the recycling infrastructure set up. So once the United States is a different animal than Europe. Europe years ago had laws that required Mercedes, for instance, to have crib to grave on their automobiles. You know, when you manufactured an automobile, you were responsible for the disposal of the wrecked automobile, or you didn't have no choice. It wasn't entrepreneurial where, you know, metal scavengers would get the old automobile. It was the Mercedes was responsible for somebody taking care of it. So Europe looks at that stuff different, and their population density is different. They don't have the land we do, but laws mandating recycling will move slower in the United States, I guess is my point.
Yeah.
And there'll be kickback, just like it is trying to get coal out of the system, and there's a kickback from 7 or 8 states that jobs depending on coal, and it's a fight to the finish. It looks like that natural gas is going to kill coal because it's so cheap, so it's going to happen anyway. But the real answer is mandated use of recycled material, and some of the companies are using it and are out ahead of the law. You know, they're preparing for that. Everybody knows it's coming.
Yeah.
But the political infighting we've had in the United States for 8 years and maybe longer than that has prevented some of those kind of laws from coming into play. But that's really what's got to happen, because energy and oil, they keep finding new fields and so forth. So it looks like it could be the new normal that the price of oil stays down. And if they don't do something with regulation, it will really kill recycling long term. Or you have to the municipalities will have to pay somebody like us to recycle it, because we can't make any money doing it by buying it.
Some sort of a subsidy.
Yeah, it could get down and dirty, and any plastic products that are made from oil, while oil is dirt cheap, you know, I mean, $45 a barrel. I mean, in this day and time, that's really low. You know, I remember paying $2 for gas in the 70s, you know, that long ago, and see where it's at now. You know, we're paying $1.99 in Reedfield today, and there's 58 cents tax in that. So really, gas is selling for $1.40 a gallon.
Cheaper than milk.
Yeah, cheaper than milk. It is. It's really unbelievable.
In fact, if you look at bottled water, gas is cheaper than bottled water. So.
It sure is. It sure is.
Another market, so here's another team, and this one I'm really curious to see what you have to say, Team 12. So they are proposing opening a recycling plant in China, and they know you're not looking into that normally, but they say, please hear us out. And so they provide here all kinds of calculations, but they start with citing the Chinese 13th five-year plan. You know, they have a five-year plan policy. And so apparently in that plan, there is something incorporated called Operation Green Fence. And that mandates that the Chinese businesses become more environment conscious and obviously recycle more.
Right.
And then they do some calculations here first for how much it would cost to ship your products to China if you want to sell them there, or if you wanted to bring them from here if you have a factory there. According to their calculations, the C part will cost about $36.6 per ton, and they apparently called a number of freight companies to see what the prices are. You have also the Port of Wilmington here, so according to their calculations, I think somewhere there it was like $3 per ton to move it there. And then they looked at the prices of recycled plastic in China, and the prices are roughly between $950 to $1,200. According to their calculations, with your price structure, you should be able to sell it or get the final price at about $1,100 while still making profits. And obviously, it's a new market. Obviously, it's not something that you are perhaps looking into in the nearest future. But according to their calculations, along with the state policies that they're about to enact, it could actually be a profitable business. And you have the image or the reputation for good quality. So they believe if your prices were even on the higher end of the spectrum, many reputable companies manufacture in China, BMW, Mercedes that you mentioned, and they care about quality of the plastic, so they can just buy any plastic. So do you think that may have any promise? Would you be interested at some point, maybe in the future, to consider perhaps moving into China?
Yes, and it would probably be from a partnership with somebody that exists
And
there.
they talk about even, they even have
with
some
somebody
ideas.
that exists there. Now, there's something going on in China now that, movement of manufacturing operations to China have been, China's been a magnet because of low labor cost and high quality workforce. This day and time, the Chinese are getting richer, and they're sending stuff to Vietnam and other countries to recycle because the labor rates are low there.
In your production cost, what percentage is labor? Is it a big part?
It's, let's see,
Because I see you have so many machines there, so.
labor is probably 10%, but the cost of the dirty plastic is 50%. So it dwarfs compared to the cost of buying feedstocks. But the labor is more of a factor, I think, in making some end products than it is in the recycling. The unskilled labor is the cost in recycling, but the skilled labor comes into the more expensive dollar per hour people in the manufacture of the product. But I think that unless China really stumbles, they're not going to be the recycling mecca in the future. It's going to be Vietnam. It's going to be India. India is importing more scrap plastic from the United States than they're like China was 20 years ago. They're sucking it up, and they're starting to get a lot. And of course, they're going to run into some of the same problems that China did with their environment. The control of wastewater and reusing wastewater and stuff is a real challenge. So they'll have to go through that same scenario that China went through. China's trying to fight that the environmental issues now, and they're serious about it. They're really working on it. Used to get a lot of lip service, and people could, bribery was rampant. You could get by the environmental laws by bribing somebody and so forth, but they've really cracked down on that. So I see them really improving, and the wage base is improving in China. So that means that they may buy plastic now to recycle and have it shipped to Vietnam and then to China, after it's recycled. And even some goes to India and then to China. So the world is really changing on some of those type of things. But I would foresee us as we grow to have a partner in China. We have a guy now that we deal with that owns a business in China, and he comes to us and buys material and ships it to his company in China. We do that now. It's limited, but I see that growing.
You will be surprised how many potential partners are suggested in these reports. They literally found companies that might be interested, names, contacts. So I'm not sure how many of them, I suppose, probably a good portion of them turn out to be not interested or interesting. But it looks like there will be quite a few leads that if you ever wanted to explore that route.
It's a shortcut without having to learn the culture and the language and so on, at least not immediately.
Have the connections in the government perhaps.
Exactly.
Now there are two more markets that I wanted to look, and then we'll move on to the next question. So there is one, Mexico, and again they talk about NAFTA, free trade. They talk about proximity here. They talk about the cheaper peso. I was in Mexico just last weekend. We had the Agriculture Symposium. We had 52 professors, 50 students. Now is a good time, so compared to earlier when peso was more expensive. And then also talk about all kinds of other reasons, from logistics to growing economy. Some people also say that certain locations have surplus of labor, so you can probably get labor much cheaper. Again, would you ever be interested perhaps to doing some business in China as far as either partnering with someone or maybe opening your own recycling plant? Is that
Absolutely. Yeah, if any company that's thinking about growth can't ignore 1.5 billion people.
Right.
A seventh of the world, you can't ignore it. I mean, you have to think like that, unless you've got a unique product that's just used in the Amazon or something, but the potential for the Asian market as a whole is just out of this world. For instance, General Motors sells more cars in China now than it does in the United States. And they started that years ago when it wasn't that big a deal, but they see the potential, and it's big. It's big.
And would the same apply to Mexico?
Yes, yes. And Mexico is probably a more natural partner.
Right, closer.
There's going to be some friction with American companies moving down there, and Trump basically won the election, pushed him over the top with touting the job loss to Mexico and blaming some of the job loss on Mexican immigrants and stuff. And I personally think it's a lot more complicated than that.
Right.
But the how our president acts and stuff like that will affect the business. How the cross-border business does. I personally think that the richer Mexicans get, the more high-end cars and airplanes and everything else they buy that we make here. So I think it's not the picture's much bigger than it's
Right.
seen sometimes by our people in government. But I think that Mexico is way over 100 million people, just a really untapped market. So
Exactly.
over the years, it'd be crazy to ignore it. And the close proximity, I mean, that's a no-brainer to want to do business there, to sell to those 100 and some million, 120 million people, and the wage base is low now. It will grow, the more business, like China, it's growing. We got all kinds of Chinese billionaires moving to the United States, and they made it on trade. It's world. There's voices out there that want to slow down globalization, but I don't think it's stoppable.
Yeah.
I think you get on the train and try to make the best of it,
Right.
but I just don't think it's stoppable, and
Yeah.
I won't even entertain the thought that it is.
It appears to me also to be not an option. It will happen or happening,
Yeah.
and it's better to, as you said, get on the train. Now, there is one more report that talks about Germany, and they talk about it both in terms of perhaps maybe even one day opening your own plant there, but also in terms of selling to them. And so they talk a lot about the laws of that country, how they require recycled materials to be used. They look at the prices. They even conducted a very nice analysis here of the competition. And so they literally have like a point-by-point comparison of your product versus all the major players in Germany. And apparently you have a number of advantages. And so they say that even if you're not ready to open a plant there quite yet, you can be selling your product to Germany. And so they do some calculations as far as how much it would cost to ship it there, who would be the potential buyers, what the final price will be. And according to their calculations, which I didn't verify, but they seem impressive, you will still be making good profits. So the question is, would you be open to the idea of selling your products to Europe? And I'm sure you've probably already explored that. And second, if a good partner came along, would you be willing to perhaps actually recycling products in Europe, in Germany in particular?
Yes, we have. First of all, we have had I'm not at liberty to mention names, but we've had a gigantic German company try to buy us
By you?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Uh,
And at this
Because-
time, you're a private company, right? You're not a public list?
Totally private, totally
So-
private company, one owner.
Uh-huh.
So the attraction of the German business community is already there.
Yeah.
Whether they would want to recycle here and move the finished recycled product to Germany, or transport some of our technology, I'm not sure how all that would work out. But they are definitely a population that's interested in recycling them.
They're the third largest consumer of recycled plastic in the world, according to some of the data provided in the reports, probably due to the robust manufacturing in that country.
Oh yeah, they're a manufacturing powerhouse, and they're a homogeneous people.
Right.
If they think recycling, it'll be almost 100% think like that, where we'll have a diversity of people that really care about it, some that okay, and some that could care less, you know. But they tend to be homogeneous about everything. And I was actually born in Germany.
Oh, you were born in Germany?
And lived over there 7 years when I was in the Army, so I'm well familiar with that culture. My last time over there was 1978, so I hadn't seen he's been over there since then, Tim has, and he's seen all the windmills and stuff everywhere. And they went solar, bonanza and solar, and France went nuclear. So it's been interesting what's going on over there, but they're always trying. But in the 60s and 70s in Germany, they were well, one of the first things I noticed in the 60s was you buy a bottle of beer in Germany and you could turn the bottle in Belgium or another country. They had an international beer container, and it was used for other things too, but it was that's way back then that you didn't throw away a bottle, and it was reused in every country in Europe. I mean, just an international bottle, you know, and stuff they were doing back in the 60s, so I can imagine what they're doing now. I haven't been over there since 78, but I would think that they would be on the top of my list of countries that would take recycling seriously, very seriously.
Yeah, I started in Germany in the 90s, and two anecdotes. One, at that time, they imposed a 50 cent, or pfennig at that time, tax on the aluminum cans. And so when you buy it, you can bring them to the store, just feed them in a machine, and you get the money back. And so the bottle itself, or the can itself, was more expensive than the drink in it. So to incentivize the recycling. Another one, I had a friend, his name was Marcus Zieger. And so he had a summer internship with one of the recycling plants. And so at that time, they would have like 5 different containers, you know, one for glass, one for paper, one for plastic, who knows what else. And he says once they were pouring a container with glass and see a piece of paper in it, and that piece of paper turns to be some sort of a newspaper with the address on it. So even though it was only one piece of paper, they actually called the police, followed the address, and apparently find somebody for putting that piece of paper in a wrong container. So the person was trying to recycle, just used the wrong. Here, unthinkable, but that was 25 years ago.
It's still like that now. I left Germany in 2013. I was in the military too, so.
Same story, yeah. So big market. I suggest that maybe now we will move on to your presentation, and then I will select some of the most interesting points, and we'll talk a little bit more about the reports. Would that be okay?
That's fine.
Okay.
Well, thank you for allowing me to come to your facility, sir. My name is Justin. I'm part of Team 171. My other counterparts are Diego in Colombia, Victor in Peru, and Valentina in France. This is just a little agenda. I wasn't too sure how we were going to present today, so it just covers on exactly what we may talk about in essence. So, my executive summary as far as the inbound container strategies, the market will profit. We were looking at Mexico, Latin America, and Canada. Canada being such a short distance away, I'm not too sure. We outsourced. We found a lot of reputable companies in the area that do recycling and statistics and percentages as well. Covering the goals and ramps. If you were to actually have a team go out there, that's the biggest challenge. Is actually, teaching the people, especially in third world countries, about recycling, even though they do it every day. But actually, with our next phase is marketing and actually developing, a marketing strategy, billboards, social media as technology has changed as well like that. The rewards, the profits, the margins, supply and demand, then just a couple things as far as like the language change, laws, restriction, and possible tariffs in the area. Summary of your company. You were established in 91. You probably know all this. Just, as part of the report that we had to understand who you guys were, what you guys did.
So that when the instructors read it, they actually have some information, because not all of them. Yeah.
Like, we're doing a company, but we don't know who you are right now. So, as far as our SWOT analysis between Mexico, Latin America, and Canada, the quality of work that you guys produce, as far as your other competitors in the area, you're top of the line. As far as extreme clean product, green equal. The only weakness we had found was a lack of awareness in society, the high cost of the process and collection. But you guys have been able to establish that since '91. A repeated rotation of stuff. There's a lot of different opportunities in the Latin America as well as Mexico, as you spoke with the other groups. We did find that Mexico, being a third world country, cost of labor was much cheaper, not as bad as like China and elsewhere that like Apple has had a problem with, having too much cheap labor. You guys want to be reputable in that sense to still have humane reasons. Canada, they've been recycling for a long time too. We found a lot of companies up there. If you were to partner with them, we also have statistics of how much cost would be as far as prices in Canada as well as Mexico. Geographical and demographical, the culture environment and the competitive environment. And if at time maybe you need to stop, you go ahead. So, our market analysis of Canada expansion, Mexico expansion, any concerns, potential customers, and the main competitors. Some main competitors that we have found was Custom Polymer. He's number 7 in the world. There's one in Atlanta, Georgia. Envision Plastics LLC, and then the United Plastic Recycling Corporation. They have a 600,000 square foot facility, about pretty much close to where you guys are at as far as size, right? Mm-hmm. Logistics, as far as transport from Canada to Mexico. The total cost is about 10% of the total cost of the product, what it costs. As far as freight from Canada, we roughly estimated a 40-foot container, which is about 50,000 pounds, to be around $1,000 as far as shipping. That includes all the taxes and everything as far as import fees. As far as a flight, you are looking at only 1/4 the size, 250 kilograms to 500 pounds, which you will make a lot of profit. And there's a higher cost, about $2,500. As far as rail, as a 40-foot container and multiple that you have on rail, it was actually the same price as what freight would have been to come from Canada. As far as Mexico, air, same thing. You have a small amount, it was about $400. Freight was a little bit more expensive because it takes a 3-day travel if there's from Mexico, unless you have a plan established in Laredo or California. California, I'm originally from California, so understanding like the water there is, if you were to establish, but the taxes were much higher, so you have to equal that in as well. These are some of the images, a little bit bigger on the other one there, but kind of show that the transportation solutions as far as pricing, some other counterparts were able to find a company that was able to do that as well. These are just some of the restrictions that we have found as far as our articles, as far as entry and exit of goods. Pricing strategies compared to what the U.S. market shows and what Canada shows, pretty reliable as far as you making a profit if you were to buy, colored, dirty, or clear white. White's more expensive. These These are potential business partners as far as Mexico that we found. PetStar, Slide 11, I believe. Some of these names are in Spanish, so me pronouncing them are kind of a little
Interested, you
Yeah.
know, we buy quite a bit of material from Mexico now, but we deal with a broker. That's a broker in between probably these people and us. If we have a list of these people, we might can save some money. Sometimes I'm sure we're going through 2 or 3 brokers to get stuff.
Can you talk a little bit about that, if I may?
Oh, that's
So, yeah, let's do it kind of discussion style. So I'm looking at the reports here, and many of them first suggest potential partners, potential buyers, potential sellers, but also a number of them, like for example, the one for the report for China, they actually did some calculations and believe that it's going to be the easiest to sell the product by either Chinese branch of Amazon or the Chinese Alibaba. And you know that's a business to business, basically,
Sure.
like a marketplace, online marketplace. And so they did some
The Alabama
calculations.
guy just went public.
Right, yeah. So
Big time money.
They say it would be very easy for you to list your products there. It's basically a commodity, so it's easy to describe. It's not like you have to have samples or something. You have the standards. And they say you don't even need anyone to start selling directly to the end consumers because they will be there looking for plastic. You list your product there, so it should be easy. Would that be, does that sound like a viable approach to you?
Yes, it seems more viable though if we're making an end product here, which we're talking about now. We haven't picked a product to make here, but what we want to do is smooth out the commodity fluctuations in plastic, which is caused by the fluctuations in oil and copper and everything else.
Right.
And we feel like that, recycling's been kind of in a recession now for a year and a half because of the oil prices. But the people we sell to aren't.
Right.
Because they're getting a deal on the plastic. The oil prices is helping them. Just like if you're a taxi driver right now, your expenses are down because of that. But if we were making an end product out of our plastic, we would smooth out that commodity fluctuation.
So what you're saying is that you're open to the idea of actually making an end product here?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So like pipes or things like that?
Well, that's one option.
That is very interesting. So you didn't mention that the first time.
Yeah,
So.
we talked this morning, Tim and I did, about we make a HMW, HDPE HMW, which is the high molecular weight pellet, which comes from scrap 55-gallon drums and that kind of material. It's the best polyethylene there is as far as toughness. You can imagine that they use it in chemical drums. Some of them even hazardous materials in them. They got to be tough.
Right.
Well, there's different types of drums. Some of them have less DOT restrictions and laws. Like a black 55-gallon drum full of soap doesn't have the manufacturing requirements that a blue barrel with a hazardous chemical in it does.
Right.
So, since all of our plastics are mixed colored or black, I think a good fit for us would be to make black 55-gallon drums for the soap market, for the wastewater chemical market, for the non-hazardous drums.
And are you considering making them right here, or would it require
Right
different?
here, right here, yes.
Wow, that would be a big step forward.
Yeah. It require investment and probably $1 million blow molding machine, and $100,000 in chiller and to make the mold. A 55-gallon drum mold is probably readily available in the mold market because it's been around forever. But yeah, we're definitely looking at that. Of course, when with the everything compressed right now, it's hard to reach out with $1 million investment.
Right.
So that's we need things to improve a little bit before we can implement some of that, but we're definitely studying it.
What options are you considering for getting the money? Equity, loans? You're not
loan.
looking to go public, right?
No, we're not quite big enough to go public. I think it's a rule of thumb, probably not a law, but a rule of thumb is you need $100 million in sales to go public. Now, sometimes companies will merge to reach that threshold to go public, and I think that would be an option at some point in time. If there was a company with $80 million and we're 20 or 25, that we merged with that company, both companies go public at the same time. I've been with a company that did that, as a matter of fact. But that's an option. But we, Tim and I agree we need to make a product here to smooth out this. Used to in the recycling business, when you weren't doing real well profit-wise, high oil prices and stuff would bail you out at some point. You'd make a lot of money,
Right.
and you'd have enough money to make it through the roof. You know, it just bounced. This time it bounced down and staying down. This is relatively new territory with the oil prices. So we're speaking of Canada and some of these. You know, the biggest recycler I'm aware of in Canada just went bankrupt. The bank called it loans and they're closed. And being semi-socialist government, it surprised me too. I figured the government would have bailed them out, and they didn't for some reason. It must have been really bad. It must not have been savable with a couple $1 million. It must have been worse than that. And I wanted to make one point about Germany. I forgot a while ago. You may have noticed on our website that our product is RoHS compliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That means that we had our finished product tested, and it meets the specifications to sell into the European market. You know, they've got a spec there called RoHS.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the ROHAUS stands for, but it has to do with mercury content and or lack of certain metals and stuff in the recycled plastic. And there's tests they run that can certify your product as being RoHS compliant. You can look it up on the internet and see what that acronym actually means, but it has to do with how clean your product is of chemicals that would damage the human body, mercury being one of the prominent ones. So we did that. We haven't sold that much to Germany, although we bought. Germany and Austria, as far as I know, are the biggest manufacturers of recycling equipment in the world.
Right.
They make the best stuff in the world too.
Right, right.
And
they care about quality, which is an important thing,
Yeah.
because your product may be a little more expensive, but also about much better quality.
And the products they make some of the innovative products. They're big in Austria and Germany in the manufacturing recycling equipment. I've got one $200,000 screen changer on one of my extruders that came from Austria, and it's a great piece of equipment. And there's very few American manufacturers of that type of equipment. There's people like us that generally we made most of the stuff out there ourselves. We built it ourselves, except for a few off-the-shelf pieces like the one I just talked about and a spin dryer. But somebody was, had the funds, is going to start a recycling plant real quick, chances are 3/4 of the stuff would come from Germany and Austria.
Yeah.
The Italians have tried to break into that market. They're making some recycling equipment, but the quality leader, like in a lot of things, is Germany and Austria.
Back to logistics. So you skipped very quickly. Could you reiterate one more time? So Canada, Mexico, how do you suggest the product is moved between those countries? And then maybe for Mr. Handy, what do you think is that a viable transportation option?
It was slide 8.
So was it sea or was it rail or trucks?
We discussed the best opportunity was for freight. As far as road transportation for Canada, North Carolina was the cheapest. Rail was also the same price. And as far as Mexico, a straight shot from Mexico City to up here would be a 3-day turnaround, was a little bit higher end of $3,000. As far as sea, it would take 12 days. It would be around $2,900 of the 250 million tons that's exported yearly. There's 108 ports in Mexico that could either travel, up and around or wherever it is to get to up here, or if you were to have an actual facility in Laredo, Texas, or in California that you were to transport the product either processed or dirty and then actually do it stateside, then rail it in between that, it would actually be more profitable to either way you went. If you were to directly have it shipped from Mexico or into Texas, then you would either way. But as far as distance travel, Canada has a lot of ventures as well, being a top recycler as well, pretty much close, couple thousand miles. So drive down, we'll be right there. So.
Yeah.
So what's your feedback to that? I mean,
Okay, well, let's start with Canada. First of all, we buy and sell anywhere. We don't have a set market. We wind up in pretty much a set market because of economics just drives it that way. But we don't have any problem selling to Canada or buying from Canada. Matter of fact, I've got one load of colorant out there that came from a company called Tech Blend in Canada. So it's always about the economics, and sometimes it's not as simple as freight cost. For instance, in Mexico, the labor and some of the cost are so low that their major cost is the freight getting it to the border and getting it across the border. Their freight, I watch it all the time when the prices drop in the United States. They can't drop on the Mexican material. It's because the freight didn't drop. It was just a commodity that dropped, and the commodity is a smaller portion of it. Down there, the cost of the material itself is not the biggest cost like it is for us. It's the freight, and a lot of times the transportation they use has to go into a warehouse and transload onto another truck in Laredo to come on across the border. So all of those are freight expenses coming this way. Going that way, it's probably a little cheaper, but my point is the commodity pricing of the plastic can be so reasonable that high freight costs are okay, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So freight is just a part of the puzzle. You have to evaluate all cost segments to decide whether to sell somewhere or not. Mm-hmm. The peso being devaluated right now, I'm sure will dictate some business decisions. Either side of the border, it affected it for sure. We even had one employee from Mexico that had some money saved up, and he took off with his peso back. He took off. He could live good for a while. People follow that kind of thing. They can see that. Canada, obviously. They do good work in Canada. The products are great, but we don't do that much with them because the recycled material that's generated in Canada usually gets eat up in Michigan and along the border before it gets to us. There's enough demand for it that there ain't a bunch left over to go south with it. If the manufacturing dried up there, I mean, that would change. But right now, generally, the quality recycled material usually winds up eaten up on the American side of the border there.
Makes sense.
Close to that, yeah. So it don't make it sell. It's not intentional we don't buy it. It's just that the economics of it don't work out. We bid for material up in Oneida, New York, and Niagara Falls area, right on the border. But most of the time we don't get it because there's pretty big recyclers up there that outbid us for it because they have less transportation costs.
Right.
So it's a interesting flux of dynamics. Freight being one of them. That's a major one. But sometimes the high freight cost works because the commodity price is low, and the commodity price goes up. The high freight cost just makes it prohibitive.
Last time you said there was a truck going with plastic fished out somewhere off the coast of BC from Canada going here. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it wasn't economics, right?
No, it was I think what drives that is basically the collection of that plastic is being done by environmentally conscious volunteers.
And why did they choose your company, not somebody closer for recycling?
I think that first of all, we're the kind of company that can use that plastic. We can blend it with other plastic. You know, it's sun deteriorates some,
Right.
laying on beaches and stuff, but we can blend it with some that's not deteriorated and bring the properties back up. So we're the kind of company that can do that. And right now it's in its beginning stages, and the volume is so low that a lot of people wouldn't mess with it because it's just not worth messing with. I personally think that the volume's going to really grow in it over
Right.
time, and I think it's it has some press value to be involved in it. You know, that can kind of
Public
put you on
relations,
put,
yeah.
public relations, put you on the map a little bit. That hey, that little guy in North Carolina is processing plastic that was picked up on the beaches in Alaska.
Well, it
And
sounds
that, you know,
sure cool, yeah.
Yep. You know, everybody's seen the documentaries with the floating ocean of plastic swirling around out there. Eventually, somebody's got a big drag nets and dragging it up, and it's no telling how many millions of pounds it is there.
Not to mention the damage it does to the ocean.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I don't know what it does to fish, but I am familiar with plastic pellets on the ground, how birds mistake it for food,
Right.
they get it in their digestive system, and then don't eat, and they die from it. I'm familiar with that.
Yeah.
What this plastic does to fish and those kind of living creatures, I don't know the ramifications, but I'm sure there's plenty.
Right.
I can see fish getting wrapped up in plastic film and
Yeah.
all kinds of scenarios I can see happening with it.
Pricing. So again, so I looked at the reports here, and just about every company suggests that you stay with your price point being a little above average, because first that signals quality, and second because your quality really is better and sometimes demands higher production costs. And then also in terms of the structure, again, so apparently it's a commodity, so there is not much, fluctuation or many options as to how you can charge your price. But then again, teams offer things like, for example, minimum order size, or for example, some sort of repeat customer discounts. Did your team consider any of those? So in terms of the price point, the level, but also how it's charged.
We actually came across the price base for the U.S. there. The pricing, slide 11, shows what we have found as far as what you guys actually do. We actually looked at other products that you would be able to recycle if you ever thought about going into as far as what the prices would be as well for them. And then in our report, we talked about the Mexican prices, Latin American prices, Canadian prices, actually cheaper to buy with the peso exchange rate, and also the Canadian exchange rate being $1 to 0.74. The prices of that were a lot better as far as buying bulk and shipping it, or if you were to get into other commodities, like just down the street, you got a scrap metal company. They probably don't mainly do scrap metal; they probably do other stuff. You guys only do a few things, which has created a profitable market, but actually expanding in the same field itself. If you had those other materials that you did, you could also sell them as well as a side subcontracted project as well. So
Yeah. Okay, first of all, on the pricing, I can see by some of the prices there. Plastics is like a lot of things. You got a published list price and then a price they really sell at.
Yeah.
So the real selling price is much lower than some of the prices I've seen. But I don't doubt that he copied them correctly off the sources. But most people pay less than the published list price. They'll sometimes the virgin manufacturers such as ExxonMobil or some of the companies that make virgin plastic, they'll take their list price, let's say it's 90 cents, and they need to move some inventory, so they'll call it off grade and sell it at an off grade price.
multiple times, it's going to show a smaller deduction of
Right.
value in
Yeah.
the weight. So.
Yeah, like when you're buying bulk plastic, if you can buy plastic in a rail car, which is equivalent of 4 truckloads, one rail car. Got 4 compartments on it, each holds the same as a 48-foot truck or a 53-foot truck. Well, if you try to buy in a smaller lot than that, you have to pay 5 cents a pound to have it boxed off. So it costs you more. Just the fact that you just want 1 truckload versus a rail car with 4, you know, that all plays in. When you see a published price for virgin plastic, it's rail car quantities. I mean, 160,000 pound minimum for that price. You start asking for anything less than that, then the price.
One team actually created a very nice table where they provide the suggested price based on exactly the quantity, and it's not a linear function. It's like goes in both,
Yep.
so exactly, you know, in the shipping amounts.
Yep.
And then you can read other published prices in the Plastic News and different sources. That's basically, especially for the virgin, is a list price. Nobody pays that, but it's the list price. Everybody gets some kind of discount off of that. It may be 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, but nobody pays the
exact
list price. So we do most of the discounting we do here is for early pay. You know, our profit margins, especially right now, are so slim that customers going bankrupt and not paying us is a real fear. And to get our money quick, sometimes we discount the price. You know, you pay us in 10 days or pay us cash, you get a better price. So we do that a lot. It cost us some to do that, but since 1991, we've only lost about $30,000 in uncollectible receivables.
Oh, that's not bad at all.
Oh, it's less than a 0.1%. For all that time, and it's everybody's ever reviewed our books just marvels at that. But we're real careful with that. We offer early discounts, and there's if you just go out and just wholesale sale and not check the credit of people and the credit worthiness and so forth, you can really go out of business. Yep. I guess you could in the metals and all the other commodities, because there's shady characters in all those kind of businesses that you have to be careful about.
One last area, and then maybe a few minutes for questions and answers, and that is marketing. So how do you reach your customers? How do you advertise? There are all kinds of suggestions here. Obviously, they talk about professional expos and all kinds of fairs, but also one I like particularly in one of the reports, the company that talks about China. So apparently in China, there is a magazine called Rubber and Plastic. And apparently everybody who has anything to do with plastic or rubber will be ordering a copy of that magazine. And they say as long as you advertise in that one, there is no manufacturer that will not see your advertisement. And so according to their calculations, to run it for 1 quarter, it will cost only $21,000. Need to take that or?
No.
So I'm not sure, would you like to comment on how your team proposes to reach the potential customers? And then maybe back to Mr. Handy, what's your take on that? So how do you advertise now, and what do you think about going to those professional magazines or maybe some sort of mail outs, or obviously expos and other more traditional methods?
Okay.
As far as Mexico, it is being a third world nation. Technology down there is slowly advancing. So we looked at marketing boards, mail delivery, even looking at having a team, trained personnel go down there, talk to larger companies, door-to-door type thing. As far as the Canadian side, social media, Twitter, they're more advanced, as well as like the United States and any other country, that is, slowly advancing into the technological world. More advertisements, digital boards, go in that avenue as approach.
So if I may ask, so for the social media like Twitter or Facebook or whatever, are there any groups where the professionals from that industry would be kind of handing out or subscribed to, or how would that work? Because we are talking here about a very specific narrow segment. I mean, we are talking basically about managers of either manufacturing companies or companies that may be collecting the scrap plastic. And those are not the general public. It's a very, very tiny portion of the population. So are there any places on social media where they actually meet in kind of concentrated quantities?
There isn't necessarily, we haven't found any since that is our last report, and it being coming up
Right.
too, we're slowly getting into it, actually done some research into it, but actually finding the right approaches at social media, how it is, even, looked at, going on the whim here, an app for recycling,
Right.
like
That's an
you
interesting
scan a
one.
product or something like that, like the Fitbit possibly, might be thrown out there for other groups to be like, oh,
Right.
hey,
Yeah.
but actually, developing, because there's a lot, this generation, they're really into their phones, everything, Fitbit, and, they want to be more, eco-friendly, this and that, actually developing an app that actually shows that you're recycling, if you were to scan something or if you were to do something, I recycled, 100 pounds this month, oh, you get a hypothetical thank you, or like after, a certain amount of time.
Badges of honor or
yeah,
something.
it makes people feel good that
Right.
they're doing something for the environment, even if it's a, little scammy thing here and there, so.
And you also mentioned maybe even sending personnel to the specific places, companies. I assume there are not that many of them, so probably maybe hundreds in the entire country. So it may be possible to literally visit them all and talk to them. So I'm not sure. So any of those sound like good ideas to you?
The first one you mentioned, the trade shows, the expos.
Yeah.
We're scheduled to go to one in New Orleans, Louisiana, the first week of March, which is called the National or International Recycling Trade Show. So there will be people from all over the world there, Chinese, Germans, people from all 50 states. And we'll have a booth set up, and there'll be three of us, Tim and I and Emily, working the booth there. So that, as far as advertising dollars, you get the best bang for the buck at a trade show like that. You can go to some of the regional ones that are much smaller and you don't get the exposure, but in these real tough times, we have to make every buck count. So that's where our advertising dollars, what little we spend, is going to them. We did advertise in the Plastic News, which pretty much goes around the world.
Plastic News, that's a magazine or?
Yeah, yeah, it's Crane Publication puts it out. We still get a copy of it, but we don't have an ad in it. But once a year, it publishes a database with the rankings of all the plastic processors in North America. And it ranks them by gross sales in every, whether it's blow molding, extrusion, recycling, it lists them like that. And it costs, probably $1,500 a week to advertise in it. So it's an expense. You look at, what kind of bang for the buck you're getting. But it's been around for a while. But I think the trade show is by far the trade show, the expo, by far the best. Now there's all kinds of other magazines like Recycling Today and Recycling Technology, and there's several magazines out there. It seems to be better for equipment manufacturers advertising than those, rather than just a recycler. Now, all that being said, about advertising is always important and reaching your customers. But after you've been around a while, we tend to know each other. So it's not, sometimes it's not as much finding a customer as it is getting the customer to take yours versus somebody else's. And then it gets into price and quality and that kind of thing. What we're suffering from right now with this commodity pricing problem is that a lot of businesses we sell to are slow themselves. So it's not we lost a customer to somebody else, they're just not buying as much. So when you take your whole customer base, it slows down, it tends to compress things. Now we're doing some things trying to sell into non-traditional places now, so we're looking at every option. We're also doing some toll processing where we wash other people's material and give it back to them. We're doing some of that, but by far the trade shows and expos are the best bang for the buck. If you've got limited advertising dollars, that's the way to go.
All right, so I think we've covered all the topics.